Thanks a lot. My name is Alphonse Mulumba, and I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are standing on and sitting on Aboriginal land, and by this pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and also emerging. And I would like to start also by thanking Diana, our fantastic and legendary young lady at the back there, for putting this together, and of course with the support of many people such as Dr. Dominic and many other who volunteered in putting this together. And thanks to all of you for being here. Excuse me, I just flew in last night, so my head, 11 p.m., so my head is kind of readjusting after also a long day. I've spent the last few years of my life wondering why my country of birth, the Democratic Republic of Congo, or Africa in general, are politically behind and also are still a development laggard. As a matter of fact, that was my master's thesis, which looked at understanding reasons why Africa is a development laggard. I'm sure I'm not the first to have asked this question, but I hope to be the last to ask this question. And I'm sure right sitting in this room, you've all asked this question at one stage or another. And Mohammed, who came here before, shows again some indication that this question is still being asked. And many across the world still do ask the question. And to every question, we do find answers. And I'm pretty sure there's quite a good number of answers we come up with. I'm going to share some of them, which I think are the answers that you have at one stage come up with to justify as to why Africa is politically behind. And these answers, some of them were also in my thesis. Why is Africa politically behind? Reason number one that people come up with is because of transatlantic trade slave, which happened between the 14th and the 19th century, by which we had all these Africans being shipped over to the Middle East, to India, to the Americas, and to Europe to go and work in the farms. That's reason number one that people give. Reason number two, why is Africa politically behind or economically behind? They will talk about imperialism. And imperialism did accentuate itself by the Berlin Conference, which happened between the 15th of November 1884 to the 26th of February 1885. And if there is one thing that we remember from that conference, it is of course the term the scramble of Africa, that the superpowers of the time sat down and put a map of Africa and divided Africa in pieces, and every person had a bit of it. Another reason that people give as to why Africa is behind is of course colonization, as indicated by Mohammed. Colonization. And when we mention it, people do say very quickly, colonization impoverished Africa. Colonization did harm to Africa, especially when we understand the fact that colonization, African colonization, happened during the time that Europe was going through an industrialization period. So therefore, Europe needed the raw material and also the people to work in the production chains. Another reason why is Africa politically behind that you and I must have come across. People do mention neo-colonization. And by that, it's basically not to tell you what the whole thesis is, but it's basically us saying, okay, this is a new form of colonization, the 20th and 21st century, by which the superpowers are still having some form of cultural and political and economic pressure on the so-called third world independent and autonomous nations. Another reason, of course, bad governance. We hear that. It emerged in the 70s, in the 80s, and had much emphasis in the 90s. The rhetoric of bad and good governance makes us understand that international financial institutions will give money to Africa and on a number of conditions, among which some form of fiscal changes, some form of other kind of policies that need to be passed. These are just a few reasons, and I'm sure we can continue the list. These are just a few reasons used to advance a position by which Africa is economically and politically decades behind the rest of the world, namely North America and the European continent. The truth is, these reasons actually make sense. They make sense in the fact that they validate that question: why is Africa politically and economically behind? But let me make a proposition to you. Africa is not as behind and politically underdeveloped as we've been told. This position was not included in my thesis. Regardless, but my thesis looked great. I graduated with distinction on a beautiful December day in December 2014. I was fortunate enough to graduate on the same day with my father, Alphonse Mulumba, who completed a honors in sociology, and on the same day with my young brother, Cedric Mulumba, who also completed a master in politics and international relations right there on the same day. What a happy day, as you can imagine, for the family. It was so special that the most read newspaper in the state of Tasmania, where we all lived back then, ran a story on our family. Smiles were wide. Pride was on our shoulders. Congratulations is all what we heard for the following hours and days and months. We had a party on that day, and we gathered about 100 people, close friends, at a Chinese restaurant in Hobart, in Tasmania. And a few of our lecturers and supervisors were also in attendance. From one speech to another, we were the stars of the day. An example to every family, an example to people of our generations. Chinese rice, of course, and noodles and Coke and Fanta were more than just guests of honors. After a drink or two, juice, not alcohol, after a drink or two, I felt the need to go and ease myself. I found where the toilets were, and I did my business and came back as a good human being. I was washing my hands. And as I was drying my hand, half dry, half wet, I started fixing my tie, looking in the mirror and fixing my suit. And all of a sudden, something hit me, an idea, a thought hit me. And I said, what if my entire master thesis was wrong? What if my entire thesis was based on a wrong question to justify conventional and also generally normalized assumptions? What if in my entire thesis I rightly answered a wrongly posed question? Because I thought my thesis assumed that Africa was politically behind compared to other continents. Here are the justifications. Why did I assume that? I asked right there in that mirror. Well, simple, because it's general knowledge, isn't it? And it's widely written about. That's what people tell us. I've got to be careful because I've got lecturers in political science here and law, so I've got to be careful on what I say. But the question is, who told me that Africa is politically behind? Of course, it's the Western world that said so, not Africans, non-Africans. To me, it sounded like a girl telling a group of other girls all the intimate stories about boys, and when you double check, She doesn't have a boyfriend. She doesn't even have a brother. So Europeans came to us came to us and after independence and in the 1960s, they set the rules in their favor. And they spent the following 60 years blaming us and telling us as to why we were not winning the game. And one of those rules is actually the concept of democracy. Right there in the toilet, I felt I was a failure. My countenance fell. I was unhappy. My feelings were mixed. I was confused, and if I had a chance, honestly speaking, if I had a chance, I would have gone back to all these people gathered and I would have told them to go back. And when I've got all things together, you come back for the party. But I gave myself that day an opportunity to believe something new. An opportunity to believe that if ever Africa had set its own rules of the game, definitely we would have concluded by now that Africa is politically advanced. The reason why we say it's not politically advanced, it's because we are playing a game in which we entered late in the process and whose rules we have not set. I've got 5 minutes to convince you that Africa is not politically behind as we've been told. I could subdivide my answers into two parts. One, to deal with answers related or proofs related to pre-colonial times, and another to post-colonial time. But because of time, I'm going to deal only with pre-colonial times. Why do I believe that Africa is not politically retarded? Based on pre-colonial proofs. One, pre-colonial Africa was innovative. The famous motto that you find in the first African museum in South Africa says, excuse me, I don't read Latin, Semper aliquid novi Africa affert, which means out of Africa comes something new. Mfeko, who wrote a book in 1984, summarized it this way. I quote, Africa is the mother of humanity. Humanity is the cradle of the first human civilization. The first renaissance on this planet was the African Renaissance. Africa was the first world, economically and technologically, not the third world. Our ancestors in Africa built the pyramid, which even in this 21st century, nobody can reproduce. Egyptian civilization was a black civilization. The pharaohs you read about in the Bible, most of them were black. Research has even proven that modern accounting and systems around money transfer and all that could be traced back to principles of negotiations in pre-colonial Africa. Number two, I believe Africa is politically advanced based on pre-colonial reasons because of the level of governance arrangement that we had back then. The multiplicity of kingdoms in pre-colonial Africa connotes to the fact that the basics of modern urban organization and the exercise of political power actually comes from there. People like Cheikh Anta Diop and Van Sina and Joseph Kizebo from Burkina Faso ended up even highlighting that the hundreds of kingdoms in pre-colonial Africa explain modern global politics. Number three, pre-colonial Africa was not isolated, it was in touch with the rest of the world. What that means in summary is that pre-colonial Africa understood the principles of trade and diplomacy. Number four, I don't want to go over my time, pre-colonial Africa was a very regulated society. Although the kingdoms back then did not have a regimented form of law enforcement orders organized into the Marines, the police, and all that, but we did have a way of actually maintaining order in the society by a few measures. One was by reducing the number of conflict and promoting peace. That's not something you hear about Africa. You hear about Africa being the harbor of war and conflict. But you wonder who causes those wars. Secondly, we had an organized system of protecting our natural laws and also by many traditional rules. Please give me 1 minute. Another reason, based on pre-colonial evidence, as to why Africa is politically advanced is that research now proves that contrary to European perceptions of Africa, our ancestors were actually well governed. We had kings and chiefs and traders and community leaders, and we had all kinds of systems in place like the judiciary and all other things. Gan and Dungan, who actually researched a bit and wrote about the Congo, said that, I quote, an African Aristotle would have found that in the Congo there was every conceivable form of constitution, from small stateless neighborhood to powerful monarchies. I'm rushing against time. Another proof based on pre-colonial evidences. All African kingdoms had some form of taxation system. Africa paid tax, Africans pay tax. And someone said that tax was actually back then had two aims. One, it was a down payment for your right to protection. You are being protected by the king, so you pay something. And number two was for economic reasons. You pay so that the kingdom can grow and expand economically. The seventh and last reason, and I will stop there, is that pre-colonial African kingdoms had a judicial system made of all kinds of court and all kinds of measures. So if you did something wrong in pre-colonial Africa, there was a way of actually getting you back on the right track. I don't have time to give you more than proofs as to why Africa is politically advanced. So that's why you should come to the next session. But in conclusion, here are just a few reasons proving that pre-colonial Africa shows that before European invasion, there was hope for Africa to actually become a far better, sophisticated society than what we think it is today. And all of a sudden, Europeans came in the 60s and they give us this present after independence called democracy, which not only is not working at the moment, as you know, but it was in the making in Europe and in the Western world for hundreds of years. And they themselves back then did not even understand it better. So next time, my friends, someone tells you Africa is politically behind, remind them of how advanced we were before they stuffed it up. Remind them of how hard, right now in the 21st century, how hard we are trying to win a game in which the rules are playing against us. Remind them of the oppression that we endured, of the hundreds of millions of people who lost their lives, and reminds them of the many things. But of course, someone will say here that don't we have proofs in the African continent of bad governance and all that? Of course we do. We do. But my point is, it is not as bad as we've been told. Thank you very much.